It was a Friday evening I will never forget. The chandeliers glittered above the marble table, laughter bounced off the walls, and I stood there in a thrift suit that didn't quite fit. Camille Brighton, my ex-girlfriend, raised her glass with a smile that cut deeper than any blade. Her voice dripped with mockery as she spoke to her family about my dreams. Elias always had big dreams, she said, pausing for effect. Remember when he said he'd buy a mansion one day? Maybe start with paying your rent, darling. Before we dive fully into this story to uncover the deepest secrets, real family betrayal and satisfying revenge, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The room erupted in laughter. Even her father joined in, adjusting his diamond cufflinks like a man polishing pride. I felt the heat of humiliation crawl up my neck, burning my cheeks, tightening my throat. But I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I simply smiled and said quietly, "Enjoy your laughter while it's free." They thought it was a joke. But it was a promise. I walked out into the rain that night, my heart heavy but my mind sharper than ever before. That night, I stopped being a dreamer. I became a strategist. As I reached my rusted car, I saw a notice tucked under the wiper. Eviction notice. My humiliation had followed me home. I drove back to my apartment in silence, the rain hammering against the windshield like the universe reminding me of my failures. I spent that night sitting on the bare floor of my apartment. No furniture. No electricity. Just me, the dark, and the echo of their laughter ringing in my ears like a song I couldn't escape. I remembered my mother's voice from years ago, soft but steady. "Son, wisdom is often born from the pain you didn't deserve." I wrote a single line in my old notebook by candlelight. "If I cannot inherit wealth, I will create it. If I cannot buy respect, I will command it." That was the birth of my plan. I listed everything I still had. An old pickup truck, 2 construction tools, and a stubborn mind that refused to quit. The next morning, I drove to Houston, hoping to find work under my late uncle's name. When I arrived, I found his old construction yard fenced off and forgotten. The gates were rusted, the machinery silent, and the weeds had claimed the ground. I thought I'd hit another dead end. But then I saw a sealed envelope nailed to the office door with my name written in his handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter read, "You have my tools, my land, and my faith. Build something they can't laugh at." I stood there in the empty yard, reading those words over and over until they burned into my memory. My uncle had left me more than property. He'd left me purpose. That piece of land became my battlefield. For weeks, I lived out of my truck, clearing weeds, repairing old machinery, selling scrap just to buy fuel. I showered at gas stations and ate whatever I could afford. Every day was a test of will. Every night was a lesson in patience. Then came Maeve Lauren, a real estate agent with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. She caught me fixing a broken gate one morning and said, "You work like a man trying to erase his past." She wasn't wrong. We struck a deal that changed everything. I would repair old, abandoned homes. She would sell them and give me a share of the profit. It started small. 1 house, then 2. Every project taught me a new lesson about patience, value, and human nature. I learned to see potential where others saw ruin. I learned to turn forgotten spaces into something worth remembering. My first big contract came from a familiar surname. Brighton. Camille's cousin needed emergency remodeling to sell her foreclosed property. I took the job. Quietly. When the cousin said, "Camille told me you still fix things for a living," I smiled and replied, "Not for long." I worked on that house like I was building my own future. And in a way, I was. Months passed. My business, Renford Restorations, grew faster than I expected. We turned neglected buildings into masterpieces. Maeve handled the clients. I handled the work and strategy. I began hiring men who had been laughed at too. Broken men, outcasts, dreamers. They called me boss, but I told them, no. We're builders, of homes, of futures, and of dignity. My quiet success started drawing attention. And with attention came envy. When a luxury investor approached me with a partnership, I hesitated. I didn't want fame. I wanted peace. But Maeve said something that changed my perspective. Elias, peace is the prize after you've conquered the storm. The investor's next words froze me in place. We're interested in the Brighton estate on Crestfall Hill. You're the only man who can restore it. My heart stopped. That was the mansion. The same house where they had mocked me. The same place where my humiliation began. And now, I had the chance to own it. I drove up Crestfall Hill slowly, almost reverently. The same iron gates. The same marble lions. The same house where I had once been mocked. Grant Brighton, Camille's father, stood outside arguing with a banker. When he saw me step out of the black SUV, confusion clouded his face. "You're here to inspect?" he asked sharply. "No," I said, handing him the purchase documents. "I'm here to acquire." The silence that followed was almost holy. Camille appeared behind him, her smile fading the moment she recognized me. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I simply said, "It's poetic, isn't it? You taught me how it feels to be small." I spent the rest of my life making sure I'd never feel it again. I watched Grant's face turn pale as he read the papers. His hands trembled. His empire was crumbling, and I was the man holding the hammer. The next morning, they woke up to a notice on their door. New owner, Elias Renford. Vacate within 30 days. The notice went out. The Brightons were supposed to vacate the mansion within 30 days. But when I arrived to inspect the property 2 weeks later, they were still there. Grant Brighton stood on the front steps, arms folded. "We're not leaving," he said coldly. "This house was my father's before it was yours." His lawyer handed me an injunction. A temporary delay. Camille wouldn't even look at me. It wasn't pride keeping them there. It was fear. They had nowhere else to go. That night, I received a call from my assistant. "Sir, there's a bank investigation involving the Brightons' estate. Something about forged inheritance papers." I sat in silence, processing the information. The mansion they mocked me in might never have belonged to them in the first place. Everything they built was a lie. And I had unknowingly bought into their fraud. The question was, what would I do with this information? While inspecting the house's foundation for renovation, my crew discovered a sealed basement door. It wasn't on the original blueprint. When we broke it open, dust and time poured out, along with a wooden trunk. Inside were faded deeds, photographs, and letters signed W.F. Renford. My surname. My grandfather's. I spent hours reading every document. The mansion once belonged to my family. Sold decades ago under questionable conditions. My grandfather wrote of being forced out by the Brighton patriarch after a forged debt scandal. So the house I just bought wasn't theirs. It was stolen from us. I wasn't seeking revenge anymore. Now I was reclaiming what was mine all along. I stood in that basement, holding my grandfather's letters, feeling the weight of generations pressing down on me. This wasn't just about humiliation or redemption. This was about justice. Camille appeared in the basement doorway and whispered, "Elias, you're not supposed to know this." Camille told me the truth. Her family had always known the house wasn't theirs. Her grandfather blackmailed my grandfather to take it. But her father made her promise never to tell anyone, especially me. Tears filled her eyes as she spoke. "I mocked you that night because he told me to. He said humiliating you would keep you from digging into the past." I wanted to believe her. but I couldn't tell if it was guilt or manipulation. Maeve warned me later. Don't let your heart rewrite your logic, Elias. Secrets never come alone. The next morning, a news headline appeared. Brighton Properties accused of multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. And the whistleblower listed? Maeve Lauren. My world tilted. Maeve had been working with federal investigators for months, using my company's projects as legal cover to access Brighton financial records. She insisted she was protecting me. But the press painted it differently. Renford tied to Brighton fraud cover-up. My company's investors started to panic. Camille called me and said, "You think you're winning, but they're going to drag you down with us." Now, both women in my life were part of the same web. The one who mocked me and the one who helped me rise. Maeve's last message before disappearing read, "Don't trust anyone. Not even me." That night, someone broke into my construction office. They left only one thing on my desk. An old photograph of my mother and Grant Brighton, smiling together. I stared at it for hours. My mother looked young, happy, free. Grant looked different too, softer, human. I confronted Grant Brighton with the photograph the next day. He hesitated, then said something that shook me to my core. "Your mother and I were once engaged." He claimed my mother broke off the engagement to marry my father, and he never forgave her. The house, the humiliation, the feud, all of it stemmed from a decades-old heartbreak turned into generational revenge. I didn't want to believe him. But the photograph, the letters, the tone in his voice, it all felt too human to be fabricated. Now, the story had shifted. This wasn't just revenge between families. It was the fallout of love twisted by pride. That night, I received an anonymous email. The subject line, "The real reason your mother left him is buried beneath this house." Following the anonymous email, I returned to the mansion alone, long after midnight. The house felt different now. Less like a symbol of triumph, more like a witness to unfinished business. In the old master bedroom, my mother's room long before the Brightons owned it, I pried open the floorboards. Inside, wrapped in yellowed silk, I found a sealed letter. It was addressed to "my son, for when the truth returns home." The letter revealed that my mother was blackmailed. Grant Brighton threatened to destroy my father's business unless she left him and never told me the truth. She stayed silent to protect me. Her closing line read, "When you reclaim what was taken from us, do not lose your soul in the process." That is the final revenge. I looked up and saw a shadow moving behind the mirror. Someone else was in the house. The mirror slid open, revealing a hidden passage. Inside, an old caretaker, Mr. Ellery, stood trembling with a lantern. He worked for my grandfather. He'd been living in the hidden section of the house for years, maintaining the underground archives no one knew existed. He said quietly, "I've been waiting for the day a Renford returned." He led me into a stone corridor filled with dusty ledgers, photographs, and reels of recorded conversations between the Brightons and my grandfather. One tape stood out, labeled "The Debt Exchange, 1971. When I played it, I heard Grant's father admitting to forging the contracts that forced my grandfather to sell. Before I could process it, Ellery collapsed. A poisoned teacup beside him. Someone silenced him the moment I arrived. At Ellery's funeral, Camille appeared in black, silent and distant. After the service, she slipped me an envelope. A document proving her father transferred all Brighton assets to an offshore account under her name. He said if anything happened, I was to give this to you, she whispered. He wanted you to know the truth before the world did. That same day, Maeve resurfaced. Disheveled, eyes full of warning. "Elias, someone's framing you. Ellery's death, the forgeries, it's all pointing to you now." She handed me a photo of the same poisoned teacup with my fingerprints on it. The police arrived at my door that evening. Warrant in hand. I spent 48 hours in holding. No charges yet, but the news spread like wildfire. Billionaire heir implicated in fraud and murder scandal. My board voted to suspend me. Investors withdrew. Everything I built, gone in a week. In the silence of my cell, I replayed my mother's words. Don't lose your soul in the process. I realized this wasn't about power anymore. It was about identity. About legacy. Then, the twist. My lawyer arrived with bail papers, signed anonymously. When I asked who paid for it, he replied, a woman named Camille Brighton. As I stepped outside, she was waiting, holding an envelope marked, "The Final Proof." Camille and I met in the same mansion that started it all. The envelope contained a single page. The original forged debt contract. But in the corner, faint and smudged, was a second signature. My father's. He wasn't a victim. He was part of the scheme. He sold the house willingly to fund his own failed empire and framed the Brightons to protect his reputation. Camille's voice broke. Your revenge was never meant for my family, Elias. It was meant for the truth. I sat in silence, staring at the walls that had witnessed 3 generations of deceit. Camille slid a small box across the table. Inside, a DNA test kit. There's one last thing you should know, she said softly. You and I might share more than a past. Camille's trembling hands held the DNA results. I took the envelope, feeling every heartbeat echo in my ears. When I opened it, the words sliced deeper than any betrayal could. Probability of paternal relation, 48%. Grant Brighton might be my half-brother. The revelation burned through me. Not in rage, but in quiet disbelief. All the years of rivalry, envy, humiliation were the echoes of a family war no one dared to acknowledge. I remembered something my mother once told me. The cruelest thing a lie can do is make you hate someone who shares your blood. Camille couldn't stop crying. He never knew, Elias. Your mother never told him. I looked her in the eye and said, then it's time someone finally does. Grant lay in a hospital bed, weakened by illness and guilt. When I confronted him with the truth, he didn't deny it. Instead, he whispered, I always wondered why she left without a word. I thought she chose wealth over love. I didn't know she carried our blood into your veins. For a moment, we weren't enemies. Just 2 old wounds facing each other. He told me the forged documents were real, but he didn't create them. My father did, out of jealousy and revenge. Grant said, I spent half my life hating you for what your father did. The other half, trying to be the man he wasn't. He handed me a key. It opens the vault beneath the east wing. What's inside will either free you or destroy you. As I left, a nurse rushed past me. Grant Brighton flatlined. He died before I could ask another question. The vault under the east wing wasn't filled with gold or property titles. It was filled with journals. My mother's, my father's, and Grant's. Decades of private confessions. In them, I learned that my father discovered the affair but never stopped loving her. Instead, he weaponized his pain, creating the fraud to destroy Grant's legacy while preserving his own. He wrote, if my son inherits truth, let him choose to be better than I was. For the first time, I saw them all. Not as villains, but as flawed humans trapped in pride. Among the papers, I found a legal document drafted years ago. A deed transferring full ownership of the mansion to Elias Renford Brighton. It was signed by both families. But never filed. Just as I decided to file the deed and end the feud, Maeve returned. Looking changed, older, softer. She confessed she'd been in witness protection since the investigation began. You were never the target, Elias. The Brightons were funding illegal trades through their estate. I just didn't expect your name would get caught in the web. She handed me a hard drive. Evidence that could clear my name completely, but also expose Camille, who transferred those funds unknowingly. Maeve warned me. You can either save your legacy or save hers. But not both. Camille walked in, overhearing everything, and said quietly, then let him decide what kind of man he truly is. The night was long and heavy. I sat alone in the grand hall of the mansion, the place where my humiliation began. Now it was my courtroom. My confession chamber. My battlefield of conscience. I held two things in my hands. The hard drive that could restore my name. And the unfiled deed that could unite both bloodlines in one legacy. I spoke to my mother's portrait. You wanted me to reclaim what was lost, not by destroying, but by understanding. At dawn, I made my choice. I destroyed the hard drive and filed the deed instead, merging both estates into one foundation for orphan children. Revenge had no place here anymore. Only redemption. As the news spread, Camille called me one last time. You didn't just buy the mansion we live in, Elias, she said softly. You rebuilt the soul of the family that broke it. But just as I closed the file, my phone buzzed. An encrypted message from an unknown number. You think the story ended here? Your father had another son. The message came at dawn. A name, a location, and a phrase that chilled me. Your father's unfinished son waits for you in Holloridge. Holloridge was an abandoned estate my father once used as a retreat. A place he called the House of Second Chances. When I arrived, the rain fell like a warning. The door creaked open to reveal a man who looked disturbingly familiar. Same eyes, same stillness. He introduced himself as Lucian Renford. I'm the mistake your father tried to erase, he said with a calm that felt rehearsed. Lucian knew everything. My company, the mansion, even Camille. He'd studied me. But what unsettled me most wasn't his knowledge. It was the fact that he didn't seem to want anything. As I left, he whispered, you built your empire on wisdom. I'll build mine on truth. Lucian began to surface in the media, speaking in interviews, claiming he's the rightful heir to the Renford fortune. He released partial documents and recordings that made my father look even more corrupt. My board started to fracture again. Old allies called to distance the brand. I watched his interviews closely. His speech patterns, his calm, his logic. It was uncanny. It was as if he'd studied my mannerisms and sharpened them into something colder. Maeve called him a ghost with a plan. Camille, quieter, said, he doesn't just want your legacy, Elias. He wants to be you. That night, I received a package. A mirror, shattered into 5 pieces. On the glass, written in marker, only one reflection survives. The next morning, Lucian announced a press conference at my mother's old foundation. The same one I built to heal what my family destroyed. Lucian's press conference was a masterpiece of manipulation. He presented documents implying I forged my redemption deed to claim both estates illegally. And then, the killing blow. An edited recording of me destroying the hard drive that held the original fraud evidence. The crowd gasped. Reporters swarmed. In minutes, my redemption became a cover-up. But what truly haunted me wasn't the public disgrace. It was recognizing the brilliance behind it. Lucian was doing to me what I once did to the Brightons. Only now, I was the one standing in the light, stripped bare. In a quiet moment, I whispered to myself. The moment you master power, it teaches you humility through someone smarter. Camille vanished that night, leaving behind only a note. He found me first. I returned to Holloridge, determined to end it. Lucian greeted me like an old friend, pouring wine as if we were brothers discussing philosophy. He said calmly, you thought redemption was a prize. It's a disguise. Our father didn't seek forgiveness, Elias. He built guilt into his bloodline. We're just the proof. He revealed that he'd been in contact with my father's old attorney. The attorney gave him access to secret accounts and a letter naming Lucian Renford as the original heir. But then he smiled and slid another letter across the table. It was from my mother. If this reaches you both, remember, one of you must let go, or both will lose everything. Lucian leaned forward. I've already decided which one of us lets go. The lights went out. A gunshot echoed through the estate. I woke up in the dark. Alive, bleeding, disoriented. Lucian was gone. But his note remained, pinned to my jacket. I didn't shoot you. I set you free. Finish what he started. When I returned to the mansion, the news was everywhere. Lucian Renford found dead in Holleridge. Gunshot wound. The weapon registered to me. The investigation reopened. The world saw me as a murderer again. But deep down, I felt something shift. Not fear, not guilt, but clarity. I realized Lucian was never trying to destroy me. He was forcing me to confront what I'd become. A man addicted to redemption as much as others are addicted to power. I walked into the mansion's hall of portraits, staring at generations of faces that carried pride like a crown. We spend our lives avenging the sins of our fathers, I whispered. But wisdom is knowing when to forgive them. As I burned the last of the Renford papers, the final page fluttered open. A bank transfer from Lucian to a name I recognized instantly. Maeve Lauren. I couldn't sleep after discovering Lucian's transfer to Maeve. I visited my company's abandoned finance office, the place that once pulsed with ambition. Buried in the old server logs, I found encrypted files signed under Maeve's access key. When I unlocked them, my heart slowed. They weren't money transfers. They were insurance policies. Lucian hadn't paid Maeve to betray me. He'd paid her to protect me if he died. One note read, "If Elias survives, tell him the truth about Holleridge." The bullet wasn't mine. Someone else had been there that night. And Maeve had known. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. She simply said, "You're not ready to know who pulled the trigger, Elias." Maeve took me to an isolated cabin north of Holleridge. Quiet, surrounded by dying trees. Inside, a frail man waited by the fireplace. His name was Yora Klein, once my father's accountant and fixer. He handled every dark transaction of the Renford dynasty. Yora told me that the Holleridge gun was registered to Lucian weeks before his death, meaning he planned the entire scene. He knew the press would crucify you, and that you'd come back for truth. He wanted to finish the cleansing your father never had the courage to. Then Yora handed me an old tape recorder. "This is from your father's final meeting. The one neither of you knew existed." I pressed play. It was my father's voice. Shaky, haunted. "If one of my sons must suffer to cleanse my name, let it be me." Before Yora could explain further, he collapsed. Poisoned. Again. The poison trail led to one place. Camille Brighton. I tracked her down at a private hospital on the outskirts of New York. She was thinner, fragile, and strangely calm. She admitted to orchestrating both poisons. Ellery's and Yora's. They were pawns, Elias. All of them. Lucian's chaos was my chance to erase what your father and mine created. I asked her why. Her answer was devastatingly simple. Because you can't rebuild anything clean while the architects of the lie are still alive. She confessed to manipulating Lucian from the beginning, feeding his rage, guiding his rise, knowing it would force both brothers to destroy each other's illusions. "You both needed to fall," she whispered. So the truth could finally breathe. She handed me one final letter. Sealed in red wax, signed by Lucian Renford. Written the day before his death. The letter was long, elegant, and mercilessly honest. Lucian wrote, "Camille told me what our fathers did. How their greed carved us into enemies before we were even born. I can't undo what's broken, but I can end the cycle. When they accuse Elias, they will bury the story with me. That's how peace begins. Not in fairness, but in finality. He revealed his own sickness. A terminal illness he'd been hiding. He knew he was dying and wanted to go out making the world believe Elias killed him, because scandal would draw the press and expose both families' corruption publicly. When history writes our names, let them call me the villain. You were always meant to be the mirror. I sat in silence for hours, staring at the letter. For the first time, revenge felt irrelevant. Everything was a strategy to end an inherited curse. A nurse entered Camille's hospital room to check on her, but she was gone. The window was open, the wind carrying in a single feather of crimson silk. Weeks later, the investigations ended. The evidence Lucian left cleared my name. Posthumously, ironically, tragically. The world moved on. The Brightons vanished from public life. The Renford name was whispered, not spoken. And I, the man who bought the mansion where they mocked me, now walked its halls not as an owner, but as its quiet custodian. Some nights I talked to Lucian's portrait. Other nights I wrote letters I never sent. Redemption, I told myself, isn't the reward of the wise. It's the patience of the wounded. In my journal's final entry, I wrote, "Our fathers built empires from deceit. We built meaning from their ruins. And in that, perhaps, we finally became men." The mansion stood silent again. But in its silence, I heard the echo of wisdom and the ghost of a man who once said, "Only one reflection survives." I looked into the mirror. This time, I saw peace. It had been months since the world stopped whispering my name. The mansion, the very place they once mocked me, had become my monastery. One stormy evening, while cataloging the archives Lucian left behind, I found a key embedded in the back panel of an antique mirror. The inscription read, "For the son who learns to see himself." It opened a hidden compartment in the library. Inside, sealed envelopes bore names. Mine, Camille's, Maeve's, even Ellery's. But one stood out. The true heir of Renford. The letter was unsigned. And at the bottom, a cryptic note. "Find her before she finds you." The pronoun unsettled me. Her. Who was she? That night, a soft knock echoed through the hall. When I opened the door, a young woman stood there, holding Lucian's pocket watch. "He told me you'd come for me, father." Her name was Isolde Marine, and her resemblance to Lucian was chilling. The DNA test confirmed it. She was his daughter, conceived in secrecy during his years abroad. But what she revealed next pierced me deeper than any betrayal. Lucian believed he wasn't the only child of your father. She handed me a faded letter written by my own mother. A confession she'd kept from me. It spoke of another son born in secrecy. Given away after my father's affair with Camille's mother. The missing heir that the old Renford records hinted at. Lucian knew. Camille knew. Everyone had played their roles to protect this shadow son. "He's alive," Isolde whispered. "And he's coming for you." That night, I received a call from a distorted voice. Calm, composed, almost familiar. "Brother, you've rebuilt what was never yours. It's time we balance the ledger." The man called himself Silas Renford. His tone was cold. Educated, philosophical. Like mine, but with something twisted beneath it. He claimed Lucian's death had been his design, not Camille's. "Camille was my instrument. You were my mirror. And Lucian, my rehearsal." He'd been in the shadows for decades, studying every move of our family, feeding information to both sides, ensuring the feud never died. Because chaos was his inheritance. I realized then, I hadn't been the avenger of our story. I'd been another pawn in Silas's orchestration. But Silas wasn't interested in money or revenge. He wanted recognition. "Father's legacy belongs to me," he said. But you, Elias, will deliver it to the world as the fool who thought wisdom could outsmart blood. Before I could respond, the call ended, replaced by the sound of the mansion's front doors unlocking. He was inside. Silas arrived not with fury, but with wine and calm conversation. We sat across from each other at the long dining table. The same one where I'd once been humiliated for my poverty. "We're the same," he said, pouring wine. "But you built forgiveness from pain. I built truth from fire." He told me everything. How he'd been the hidden son, raised under another name, and discovered the family's secret accounts after our father's death. He'd orchestrated every major collapse. The leaks, the scandals, even Camille's confession, to dismantle the corrupted empire from within. But he envied me for one thing. They loved you, Elias. They pitied you. No one ever pitied me. The tension between us felt biblical. Cain and Abel reborn. In a final act of understanding, I told him, "You were never unloved, Silas. You were unseen." He smiled and drank the wine he'd poisoned himself. Before collapsing, he said one last line. "Now the sins are buried. You're free to live, brother, or not." I buried Silas beside Lucian, beneath the oldest oak behind the mansion. For once, there were no reporters, no vultures. Only silence and the scent of redemption. I donated the mansion to a university as a historical archive. The House of Two Brothers. They asked why I didn't sell it. "Because some things must outlive profit," I said. "Wisdom doesn't inherit wealth. It inherits peace." In my final letter to the world, the one that would be read when I was gone, I wrote, "The world mocks the poor because it fears humility. But I learned that the truly rich are those who lose everything and still speak kindly of life." When I closed my eyes in the last scene, the camera, if this were film, panned across the empty dining table. No gold, no laughter, no betrayal. Just light filtering through dust, resting on the chair where it all began. Elias Renford, the man who was mocked for being poor, had bought not just their mansion, but his own freedom from the cycle of revenge. I began this story mocked for being poor. But I learned that poverty was never the absence of money. It was the absence of peace. I bought the mansion where they once humiliated me, not to prove I'd won, but to remind myself that every insult is just the world asking if you still believe in your worth. They thought I came for revenge. I came for understanding. I wanted to know why people destroy what they love, and why forgiveness feels heavier than hatred. Now I know. Wisdom doesn't roar. It whispers. It tells you that victory without mercy is still a kind of defeat. So if my story has taught you anything, let it be this. The truest power isn't found in the mansion you buy, but in the silence you carry when the world no longer defines you. Years have passed since I walked those marble halls for the last time. The foundation I built has helped over 300 children find homes. Every month, I receive letters from young people who found hope in the space where hatred once lived. One letter stood out. It was from a boy named Marcus who wrote, "You bought a mansion, but you gave us a future." That's when I understood. The revenge I sought wasn't in ownership. It was in transformation. Camille reached out to me last spring. She'd opened a small bookstore in a quiet town, far from the spotlight that once defined her. We met for coffee, and she looked different. Lighter somehow. "I'm sorry," she said. Not for the mockery, which had become a distant echo. But for the years she spent believing wealth defined worth. "We were all trapped in that mansion," she continued. "You were the only one brave enough to walk away. We didn't become friends. But we found something more valuable. Mutual understanding. The kind that only comes after fire." Maeve disappeared into a life of her own choosing. Last I heard, she was teaching real estate law at a community college, helping people understand contracts so they'd never be exploited the way my grandfather was. She sent me a single postcard that read, "You taught me that wisdom isn't knowing everything. It's knowing when to stop proving yourself." I keep it on my desk. Isolde visits sometimes. She's studying architecture, wanting to build homes that honor history instead of erasing it. She calls me Uncle Elias, and I've learned to accept that title with grace. She once asked me, "Do you regret buying the mansion?" I thought for a long time before answering. "I regret nothing," I finally said. Because every choice, every humiliation, every victory brought me here. To this moment of peace. She smiled. That's wisdom talking. And maybe it was. I now live in a modest home by the water. No chandeliers. No marble. Just simplicity and the sound of waves reminding me that even the mightiest storms eventually calm. I still work with my hands. Not because I have to, but because building things reminds me where I came from. I mentor young men who've been laughed at, dismissed, told they'd never amount to anything. I see myself in their eyes. That hunger. That quiet determination. I tell them what my mother told me, wisdom is often born from the pain you didn't deserve. Last month, I drove past Crestfall Hill. The mansion stands beautiful now, filled with students studying history, architecture, and human dignity. The iron gates are open. Anyone can walk through. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. Because the mansion I truly bought wasn't made of marble and chandeliers. It was built inside me. Stone by stone. Choice by choice. Forgiveness by forgiveness. If you were in my place, if those who mocked you ended up beneath your roof, would you choose revenge or redemption? I chose both. And then I chose something greater. Peace. Tell me in the comments what you would have done. Because sometimes, wisdom begins when stories end. And sometimes, the greatest mansion you'll ever own is the one you build within yourself. I began this story mocked for being poor, but I learned that poverty was never the absence of money, it was the absence of peace that I bought the mansion where they once humiliated me, not to prove I'd won, but to remind myself that every insult is just the world asking if you still believe in your worth. They thought I came for revenge, that I came for understanding, that I wanted to know why people destroy what they love, and why forgiveness feels heavier than hatred. Now I know, wisdom doesn't roar, it whispers. That it tells you that victory without mercy is still a kind of defeat. So if my story has taught you anything, let it be this. The truest power isn't found in the mansion you buy, but in the silence you carry when the world no longer defines you. Tell me, if you were in my place, if those who mocked you ended up beneath your roof, would you choose revenge or redemption? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes, wisdom begins when stories end.